y actualmente coordinadora de investigación.
Me encanta eso de que la doctora Intrago trae porra, entonces, pues porra para todos, ¿no? Porra para Colette, para Elizabeth, para Intrago y... México. Ok, pues para mí es un placer coordinar esta mesa y verdaderamente no son cuestiones de quedar bien, sino que me parece que tenemos tres grandes personalidades aquí y hay que exprimirlas en el buen sentido de la palabra. Y bueno, el nombre de nuestra mesa es Prospectivas de la simulación interprofesional. Y hablando de que la prospectiva hace referencia a una proyección hacia el futuro, de cómo visualizamos en este caso la simulación interprofesional, no solamente en un ámbito académico, en la institución de pregrado, sino también en el ámbito clínico hospitalario. Y voy a tomarme tres momentos. Un momento para establecer definiciones o conceptos, un segundo momento para establecer el aquí y el ahora de esa simulación interprofesional y finalmente cerrar con ustedes con esta proyección hacia el futuro de la simulación. Si tomamos en cuenta que para la OMS y para muchas otras instituciones la educación interprofesional se menciona como un entorno educativo donde los estudiantes de una o más áreas de especialización o de licenciatura se unen para aprender juntos y, como dicen, aprender desde y entre ellos para poder atender a un paciente. Y considerando que en este entorno hay un aprendizaje, me gustaría su concepto o su visión de cómo conceptualizan la simulación interprofesional. Quien guste.
Bien, nosotros desde que entramos a la simulación, pues primero queremos entender qué es. Sí, se escucha. ¿Qué entendemos por simulación y los objetivos de aprendizaje que queremos obtener? Cada disciplina empieza a desarrollar esas competencias en su campo, ¿no? Medicina acá, enfermería acá, nutrición por acá, psicología por acá. Pero la realidad es que la práctica profesional no trabajamos nadie solo. Sin embargo, trabajamos con la misma persona, que es el paciente. Requerimos entonces formar competencias que permitan trabajar en equipo a todos esos profesionales que son de diferentes disciplinas que se han formado en diferentes lugares, ¿no? Por ejemplo, aquí está la Facultad de Medicina y la Facultad de Enfermería está hasta Xochimilco, entonces la distancia primero nos separa. Segundo, tenemos planes de estudios muy particulares y todos cumplimos en formar profesionales muy competentes porque son muy demandados en las instituciones de salud. Sabemos que nuestros egresados se integran inmediatamente, pero trabajan en equipo. Cuando ya hablamos de esto, ya entonces tenemos que ver la educación interprofesional con las competencias que deben de poseer, porque la realidad es que a pesar de que tienen eventos en donde tienen que trabajar en equipo, llega a haber situaciones en que no se logran los objetivos esperados por un lado y por el otro. Trabajan juntos con el mismo paciente en unos minutos, pero después se separan. O bien hacen planes de tratamiento del manejo del paciente considerando desde mi perspectiva y lo que a mí me toca. Y se ha visto por recomendaciones de la OMS, por muchas situaciones, que para mejorar la calidad de la atención, para la seguridad del paciente, se debe de trabajar en equipo y se requiere entonces competencias interprofesionales. La simulación, por lo tanto, tiene que ser diseñada con educadores en simulación de cada disciplina, diseñando específicamente desde su disciplina competencias interprofesionales.
Muy bien. Elizabeth Collet.
So I kind of look at it a little bit differently in that even though we're interprofessional, when we come into a simulation that is interprofessional, that we have to look at it interprofessionally as to what the outcomes and objectives are of the simulation. And I think sometimes when we come from different aspects, the actual objectives of the simulation are missed because the different professions are trying to make points based upon some of those competencies that that particular profession needs. And so then I think that complicates things, because then is that the objective of the actual simulation or the case or what's going on? Because then you lose a little bit of that opportunity to actually communicate with each other, which I believe is one of the biggest barriers in interprofessional interactions. And so really looking at of interprofessional simulation to really help improve the communication, to understand all of those different scopes of practice, I said is extremely important, because I think that's the part that we miss. Because if I don't understand the context of what the doctor is allowed to do as the nurse, or what physical therapy is allowed to do, then I'm not going to be able to communicate with them to ensure safe patient care. And then I'm going to make assumptions that they don't know what they're doing, or the communication and those feelings that we were talking about earlier in regards to debriefing start coming in, because we make assumptions that we don't need to be making without understanding clearly the context of each simulation and how the simulation is working.
Thank you. So I concur with everything already said, and I think for me, interprofessional simulation, whether it's for education or for other purposes, is very much all around learning how to collaborate, learning how to work as a team for our patients, our service users, and we need to think about that from the very outset. So we should be thinking around always focusing on aligning our objectives. And I really agree with the sharing and understanding of scope of perspectives of what our roles can and cannot do, because that's often conflict in the hospital side of situations. And I can think of many examples where we have used interprofessional education in an undergraduate situation in the UK, but we don't do enough of it postgraduate. It's very, very hard. It's all, well, there's lots of reasons for that, and that's a question later, I know. But I think it is about trying to learn and establish what our values are, definitely identifying that we all believe that to do the patient no harm, that we need to learn what our responsibilities are, and simulation can allow that in a safe environment rather than it happen at the bedside. And I think it should be about thinking around our core values as health professionals, and aligning maybe those things like equality, diversity and inclusion. Those can be those opportunities within interprofessional education. So teach uni-professionally the skills that they need to do their job, and bring them together and assimilate, as James Slides would say.
Ok, entonces escuchándolas, puedo decir que la simulación interprofesional es esta simulación que está diseñada para que trabajen en conjunto varias profesiones con un objetivo específico en el cual ellos ya tienen el antecedente de estas competencias en las que van a converger para que puedan dar una atención segura y de calidad. Entonces, estableciendo ya este concepto, me gustaría ya específicamente desde su institución, desde donde ustedes laboran, ¿cuál es su experiencia o cuál es la situación actual de la simulación interprofesional? Es decir, ¿tienen un programa consolidado de simulación interprofesional? ¿Y cuáles han sido los alcances de este programa?
You want me to go first? Oh, thank you. Working from a hospital perspective, back in 2009, we were very lucky enough to have some money for nursing, which was pretty rare. And I happen to have hold of that pot of money. And I've met some lovely anaesthetists who were doing simulation. And I said, hey, I want some of that. And so we jumped in together. I watched what they were doing. And then I said, I think we could make this interprofessional. And the funding for them came for their newly qualified doctors. I was responsible for the newly qualified nurses. And we just threw it together. We doubled the amount of courses we did a year so that we could have 6 nurses and 6 doctors. I became faculty and developed nursing faculty, so we reflected our learners. And that course is still continuing, which is however many years, someone do the maths. But we now have places for physiotherapists and radiographers and pharmacists, and they're hospital-based scenarios. We run it about 30 times a year. So we've got a lot of data to show how really cool it is. The struggle is getting the pharmacists and the therapists to be faculty because there's smaller groups of staff. But that has been probably one of the best examples that's continued. So we renew the scenarios depending on what's hot in the hospital. So medicines errors at the moment, falls and other things like that, but also the stuff that the junior doctors have to meet in their curriculum and what the nurses have to meet in their curriculum. So, does that answer your question?
Esa parte de con lo que respecta al hospital, sí, Elizabeth y Catalina.
So my experience comes from a couple different areas because I've worked with a medical group. My husband's retired military, so I had the opportunity of working with a military group that trained and educated medical technicians, physicians, and nurses. So I have an interprofessional aspect in that sense. And with that, they were military. So when they had to come to us, they had no choice. So there was nothing that we had to worry about scheduling. They were required to get the training. They had to be there. So that was kind of nice because they didn't have a choice. But so for academically, I've worked currently with Texas A&M University, and I've actually moved recently to another university. But there we have College of Medicine, a School of Nursing, a School of Pharmacy, and a School of Public Health. And one of the bigger events that we have had really was designed around disaster training. And so we had one of the largest student-led disaster training programs in the US, and the students are the ones, they have a specialty course to manage and really kind of align how they're going to do this whole interprofessional activity. But with that particular institution, with interprofessional education, it was sometimes difficult because of the scheduling, the way that the nursing students are scheduled for their semesters and the way that medicine and pharmacy, their schedules didn't really align very well. So sometimes trying to create something interprofessional with them was a struggle because you had to figure out, okay, well, where am I going to align the curriculum to be able to get an experience? So for example, at that institution, we did an interprofessional simulation with a postpartum hemorrhage and a preeclamptic patient, both very emergent situations in obstetrics that you need to have that communication and that aspect. And we were very intentional in really trying hard to continuously make that happen. But it would be hard because we would have senior nursing students with first-year medical students that hadn't even been in OB yet, didn't even know how to massage a fundus, didn't know how to do anything. And so then, which was a learning experience for the nursing students because they were actually teaching them how to do things, which was okay. Or the opposite, we'd have younger nursing students and fourth-year medical students, and it just, some of the communication was a little bit difficult. Currently in my new role, I'm going to be a senior associate dean for a brand new nursing program. So we are building it from the ground up, and it's going to be extremely exciting. And so we have the opportunity, because we have an osteopathic medicine program, as well as pharmacy and public health. And so as we're designing our curriculum, we're going to intentionally integrate interprofessional opportunities within simulation and the clinical setting within our program. So I'm really excited about that opportunity because we'll be able to really build those opportunities from the ground up. We're going to model the behaviors, and we're going to be able to mentor and establish that from from ground zero. Some center.
Wow, interesantísimo. Catalina.
Bien, nosotros de la misma manera empezamos a desarrollar escenarios en la Facultad de Enfermería y sabemos que siempre requerimos del componente de otro profesional. Los reemplazamos, así como lo hace medicina también seguramente, con un facilitador que ocupa y hace el rol, ¿no?, del médico o hace el rol de la enfermera. O sea, los hemos diseñado y los hemos implementado, pero todavía no hemos trabajado en conjunto. En pregrado también ya hemos trabajado con farmacobiólogos, con médicos para diseñar escenarios, pero nuestros objetivos son para enfermería, ¿no?, para las competencias de enfermería. Sin embargo, en posgrado sí se llegó a hacer escenarios interprofesionales, médicos y enfermeras, pero pues ya son enfermeras realizando la especialidad de diferentes especialidades en conjunto con los médicos. Se dio una experiencia, pero me parece que la pandemia nos detuvo, porque requerimos seguir trabajando y empezar a diseñar un programa en conjunto para pregrado, posgrado y ver cómo lo podemos alinear. Pero esas serían nuestras primeras experiencias que hemos tenido.
Pues como vemos, hay programas muy consolidados, programas que ya se establecieron y que han generado nuevos programas que van a comenzar de cero con la experiencia que ya le generaron las experiencias previas y programas que van en crecimiento, madurando, ¿no? Entonces, nunca es tarde para empezar un programa de simulación interprofesional. Entonces, si reflexionamos un poco sobre cómo nosotros tenemos este proceso de planificar, diseñar y ya llevar a cabo estas simulaciones interprofesionales, realmente el trabajo implica mucho esfuerzo y creo que también requiere tomar en cuenta diversos elementos como tener educadores en simulación de las diversas áreas, cómo capacitar a esos educadores, los recursos financieros y tecnológicos, ¿no? Entonces, me gustaría centrarme un poquito, que me dieran ustedes su experiencia sobre qué barreras se enfrentaron ustedes para implementar el programa de simulación y que profundizaran un poquito más en estas estrategias que ustedes utilizaron para solventar estas barreras. Incluir dentro de estas barreras estos aspectos culturales o ese perfil de cada una de las profesiones que también está muy arraigado, ¿no? Yo como médico soy médico y no me quitan de aquí, ¿no? Entonces, me gustaría que abordaran ese punto y que lo profundizaran un poquito más.
The barriers, I think, in my mind, one of the biggest barriers, again, is timing. Schedules is really a significant barrier, especially in an academic setting and even in situ, even when you're at the hospital setting, really, when is the best time to do a simulation? Because if you try to do something in situ and all of a sudden a real emergency comes in, may not be the best opportunity to be able to try to, I mean, you can observe the teamwork that occurs within the emergency, right? And kind of give feedback and debriefing. But I think timing is a really big thing. I know for myself, and there's been a lot of conversation amongst all of the other professors that have been here in speaking about really losing faculty. We've lost a lot of simulationists, people in the hospital, doctors, nurses are leaving the profession after COVID. And I think it's left us this gap in education as to, we had this really great, robust educators that were helping with these processes, and now some of them are left, and so now we're having to fill that gap with people that truly don't know. Or when we all got hit with COVID, we all pivoted and went to these platforms that none of us were familiar with. So even pedagogically speaking, if we were using Zoom and trying to do simulations in Zoom, none of us really knew how to do that. So we probably, I mean, I hate to say, but we may have done just a little bit of harm because we didn't really know what we were doing. I know myself, I tried to keep my own model as a simulationist of the debriefing and the speaking to my students within these settings, but they could have had family members in the hospital or different situations going on. So I think losing some of those people that were either 5-year, 6-year, 20-year simulationists, educators, doctors, nurses, providers in the system. When we lost some of that, that creates that gap into where now we have to re-educate everybody on these processes. So even in the United States, and I know talk is one of the things that are being established in other areas, but we looked in the US, we use a lot of team steps. But it's only as good as the person that uses it. I mean, if you're trained in the process of how to communicate with team steps, if you don't use it, then you're not communicating appropriately. And team steps is one of those that was generated through the military, but was really created to help with those difficult conversations and those concerns that occurred centered around medical errors. I mean, medical errors in the United States, I'm not sure about the statistics elsewhere, but in the US, medical errors are one of the top causes of death in the United States. And in my mind, that's scary because many of those are preventable if you had appropriate communication with your interprofessional team. And so I think when we have people that aren't trained in the language or how to model the behavior, then that ends up becoming a barrier. So I think it's a matter of really everybody coming back together and really trying to see how we can integrate those appropriate models of education within the institutions. I know there was questions and answers earlier in regards to kind of looking, can we put this in the undergraduate programs? And I know a lot of undergraduate programs do try to teach their students with these communication models, but then again, I believe it was Dr. Gonzalez yesterday that said that you can do all you can in the academic setting, but then when you go to the hospital setting and the providers, the nurses, the doctors in the hospital setting aren't modeling that behavior and they're actually unfortunately being incivil, how as us as educators, how do we help the student with that conflict in their roles? Because then that just creates a very uncivil environment, and I'm not going to want to take my students back there. And so really, how can we start to reframe it and come together with our practice partners to really try to establish appropriate communication? Because if they're being uncivil to our students, they're being uncivil to each other. And so how can we help them really circle back and come back around and say, this is for our patients? I mean, that's the culture you spoke about earlier, right? That's the important thing, is how can we ensure safe patient care and that everybody is on that same page? And I think that's really, how can we come back to that?
Muy bien.
Okay, thank you. Wow, so lots of things that we can do, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I'm not a fairy with a magic wand, although I'd like to be. I think there's something around being really innovative and creative, which as simulationists, we know we are. So let's draw on our expertise. And some of that is about inviting those unwilling people to see what you do, visually see or hear the impact of interprofessional simulation. Those have been some of the really powerful moments when I've tried to push the barriers beyond the foundation course to other courses, and I've said, come and see. And sometimes you get them there and the penny drops. They think, aha, look at that dialogue. They're hearing the problems that these staff have. And so that, I think, is really opportune. I think so. I've done that quite a few times. I've also worked out, and I'm sure you all do it, but maybe the way I'm putting it is a bit cheeky, but I find out who are my friends and or followers, and get them to come with me and build a sort of critical mass. Now that's, again, not easy. I work in an organization that has 25,000 staff. They all want to do simulation. So I try to create mini-me's, people with their own mind, but who have the same values as me. And I think it's about increasing your offer to be a center-based simulation where you bring the learners out of practice, to do some in situ, to do some hybrid perhaps. And I think the other thing we need to really think about is many of our staff now who are qualifying now have experienced better simulation. But if we go back 5 or 10 years and beyond, people have had some bad experiences. So So we can use all these lovely, great people that have had simulation to bring them on board. But we need to go back to some of the more hierarchical colleagues. And I certainly had it when I was trying to convince nursing at Guy's and St Thomas's. They were terrified about going back into clinical practice. And I said, but we could teach you through simulation. They were absolutely adamant that it could not be with anyone else. They wanted the curtains shut, the cameras off, no other profession were there. And I realized that they were just absolutely petrified of making a mistake. So we know what to do. We have to think psychological safety. So I said, okay, let's do it in small groups. Let's do it together. Let's learn together. And, that brought about a whole new generation of people who were heads of nursing, chief nurses, directors, who'd never had any simulation experience. So I went uni-professional over that sort of period of time. But then I encouraged them to think interprofessionally after that. So those are some of the ways. And then it's about just, I have to mention, gathering data, showing some kind of improvement, confidence rate scales, whatever it is, and sharing that data. And I think we don't do enough of that. We don't publish enough about what we're doing, but that to prove that it works is where we need to go. Does that answer?
Ok, no, pues interesantes las respuestas, ¿no? Catalina, en este proceso que tú llevas en establecer estos programas de simulación interprofesional, ¿con qué barreras te has enfrentado y cómo tú piensas solventar estas barreras?
Muy bien. Si bien es reconocido ya por todos nosotros que se requiere la formación interprofesional, cuando diseñamos un escenario de simulación, pues que se requiere primero la formación, como decían, contar con educadores en simulación de cada disciplina, que tengan esa formación y la experiencia. Y eso al menos requerimos 2 años de formación. Entonces, cuando iniciamos a consolidar un programa, a diseñar el programa, tenemos que atraer recursos disponibles, interesados, que a veces tienen que poner de su tiempo, de su inversión de tiempo y dinero para poder participar en todas las actividades que requerimos hacer para formarnos como educadores en simulación, crear nuestro currículum, dar resultados. Todo eso es un trabajo que requiere de un equipo. Bueno, consolidar ese equipo, formar educadores en simulación. Ya cumplo con mi disciplina, pero ahora las otras también lo tendrían que hacer. Una vez que ya hacemos eso, ahora nos tenemos que formar en educación interprofesional para comprender cómo se desarrollan las competencias interprofesionales y estas se obtienen a través de la simulación. Por lo tanto, el tener el recurso humano, que es lo más valioso, es lo primero que tenemos que solventar. Lo siguiente, ahora sí vamos a hablarnos con los otros compañeros de trabajo, hablar con los otros profesionales, las otras disciplinas, tener la apertura para hacerlo. En este caso nosotros, aquí las doctoras y una servidora con otros profesionales, a invitación de la Facultad de Medicina, iniciamos la propuesta para la educación interprofesional en la UNAM. En esta, nosotros trabajamos con nutrición, con fisioterapeutas y con trabajo social para proponer una estrategia para integrarla dentro del currículum. Porque si bien los formamos con las propias competencias, ¿cómo y en qué momento iniciamos la formación interprofesional? Entonces, en el pregrado la vamos a introducir a través de 2 estrategias. Es una asignatura optativa que va a ser específicamente para la formación de competencias interprofesionales. Es decir, que se va a hacer la convocatoria a todas las facultades y escuelas para reunir un grupo y empezarlos a formar. Pero que necesitamos formarnos nosotros en educación interprofesional, desarrollar una buena estructura, que eso ya lo hicimos, del contenido de la asignatura, proponerla a todos nuestros consejos técnicos de cada facultad y escuela, no las aprueben y luego coincidir en tiempo. Porque mientras nuestros alumnos pueden tomar la optativa durante el semestre, podemos dejarlo en el intersemestral, o en qué momento están desocupados, en qué momento medicina, enfermería, nutrición, psicología, tienen ese tiempo que coincidan para su asignatura. Luego, no entrar en conflicto con los planes de estudio porque tienen que cumplir con créditos y que eso se suma a su certificado de estudios, vamos a decir, que tiene que ser integrado. Entonces, administrativamente también eso nos tiene un poquito así. La otra estrategia es un programa de servicio social interprofesional con la intención que los que tomen este servicio social van a tener tutores o profesores de cada una de las disciplinas formados en educación interprofesional y con el objetivo de desarrollar competencias interprofesionales con diferentes estrategias. Una de ellas, claro, una de las más fuertes es simulación clínica. Para entonces, durante un año de servicio social, tener grupos interprofesionales pero aquí ahora, cuando lo probamos, esperamos que lo elijan, porque esto es una opción. Una asignatura es optativa, es opción, y podemos tener de medicina y enfermería, pero requerimos de las otras disciplinas y cómo convencer y llegar, y tenemos que buscar estrategias para acercarnos a cada escuela y facultad para atraer a nuestros egresados, ya sea a la asignatura o al programa de servicio social. Es una forma que iniciamos por ahí. Y yo creo que en el momento en que nos empecemos a formar y a diseñar escenarios de simulación, yo espero que tengamos la suficiente madurez y lo que decían hace rato, egos y mi postura de liderazgo, y yo sí espero que al formarnos como educadores interprofesionales eliminemos esas barreras de cada disciplina y podamos trabajar nosotros para poder formar a profesionales interprofesionales.
Muchas gracias. Interesante. Creo que es muy relevante que las tres coincidieron en la cuestión del recurso humano, de tener educadores preparados en simulación interprofesional. Y esto me lleva a la siguiente pregunta. ¿Ustedes cómo preparan a sus debriefers para dar un debriefing interprofesional? ¿Cómo lo preparan? ¿Ustedes han evaluado cómo dan esos debriefing interprofesionales y cómo corrigen, o no corregir, la palabra no es corregir, cómo mejoran ese debriefing?
I can do. Thank you very much. So, thank you for a great question, super question. How do we prepare them? Well, fundamentally, we need to prepare everybody to have the ground sort of footing of knowledge base around simulation-based education, psychological safety, and all the other things that we've talked about. I firmly believe that we should be training together, so our faculty should train together, and that's regardless of role and seniority. So we focus very much, and I lead the faculty development program, which is sometimes a bit of a surprise to some of my senior medical colleagues, but you know, I can teach debriefing and human factor skills. So that's some of the start of it, just showing that anyone can do this is very practical. But I think the other thing really that I learned the hard way was, because it isn't just about getting them to train together and practice debriefing together. We actually had to do some quite explicit training in being an embedded participant. So I think you might call it a confederate or a standardized patient, but I mean as in a member of staff. And so because we would often have people over role play that, so they would be inappropriate, and that would alienate then the nurses or the healthcare assistants or the radiographers on that. So there's something about interviewing staff and having those faculty, those staff being represented in the coaching. And so we did a lot of work around learning the language that we use. We talked about I can't remember, it might have been Jane, jargon and abbreviations. So it's thinking about sharing what we mean. And so we would do that for our faculty. So literally next week when I get back to London, we've got our educator fellows, so medical doctors starting, we've got some physicians associates, we've got 2 nurses, a midwife and a radiographer, a few other people, and they're all coming on a 2-week induction together for simulation, so that we will do all the things that we do with our learners, build rapport, get them to know each other, share their perspectives about the debrief model from a medical perspective, from a therapist perspective. And then we think about these different roles, the standardized patient, the embedded participant. And that is a very practical way. I haven't measured its impact, but I have seen higher quality simulation. And when we do peer review of our courses, we see that. And they seem to appreciate the learners then. They understand the learners that little bit more. And we do some stuff when we debrief our debriefs, which we do as a collective group. We transcribe a bit of our debriefing, and we analyse both the language that we've used, but we also analyse the seating position. We analyse and we look at the learners versus the participant and the faculty, and we try and co-learn together about how we could improve. And sometimes that is about understanding the hierarchy of the learners versus us and other things. I think that's okay.
Bien, yo considero que, bueno, nosotros en el caso de la Facultad de Enfermería, nuestro programa, vamos a decir que es muy reciente, porque hemos vivido cambios, vamos a decir políticos, cambia la dirección, cambia la gestión, mueven gente, se movió la persona que estaba en mi lugar, se movió, y la persona que estaba en el de posgrado se fue, llegó otra, y empezamos a formarnos nosotros como educadores en simulación, adquirir experiencia en debriefing. Nosotros creo que todavía nos tenemos que consolidar más. Sí, nuestro objetivo ya en corto es certificarnos como educadores en simulación para poder iniciar el trabajo en conjunto con otras escuelas o facultades para empezar a diseñar escenarios interprofesionales. De la experiencia que tuvo posgrado, pues es equivalente. Necesitamos a alguien que tenga las competencias de un educador en simulación como para yo decir, bueno, el debriefing bien, necesitamos fortalecer esto y el otro, porque estamos en ese proceso de aprender.
Ok, muy bien. Elizabeth.
Thank you. So I've had a couple of different opportunities to be able to kind of establish how we are doing this and getting our debriefers to be able to debrief appropriately and accordingly. So what we've done in the past, and I've done this at different places, and I'm hoping to continue this model as I move to my new position, but we've tried to do something similar to a tiered approach. So if we have somebody that's brand new coming into the academic setting, we try to have a mentorship type of program to where the first types of things that they're going to do is really kind of more of those introductory or novice things that a simulationist would do. So an introduction to the healthcare simulation standards of practice, introduction to like IPEC competencies, team steps, and really kind of starting to develop them on that ground level instead of just throwing them in the water. Because I think sometimes when we do that, we tend to, people struggle and they don't stay. So really trying to have it tiered appropriately. And I think when you do that, it also gives you the opportunity to really start gaining, engaging, and understanding of the facilitator that you're educating. Because as was mentioned yesterday in one of the pre-briefing sessions, everybody doesn't need to be a debriefer. Everybody doesn't need to be a simulationist, because sometimes Dr. Cardenegrin calls it hawks and doves. And sometimes you have people that are going to go in there and they're going to fail absolutely everybody, no matter what they're doing. They could have an excellent performance and everybody fails. And then you're going to have the ones that are there and they're like, oh, well, they wouldn't do that in the clinical setting, so I'm going to go ahead and pass them, and I'll kind of help them and guide them along. And you need people to have that shared mental model when you're debriefing, because there are people that aren't going to be successful, and how do you remediate them? And but there are people that are going to be successful that shouldn't all be failing. So really kind of gaining a sense of really who should truly be doing it, because they could be an amazing clinician, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a great facilitator or debriefer. And so that gives you that opportunity to maybe even kind of start filtering or finding strengths, and maybe they're great at helping. We identified yesterday that there's a couple of two-man shows as far as simulation centers. So maybe their strength is helping set up the simulation. Maybe their strength is the operations person, doing the stuff on the computers that you need to if you're using a mannequin, helping train standardized patients if they're doing that, and maybe they're not debriefing. So then we kind of take it to the next level. And at that moment in time, if we identify that they are going to do well within the simulation setting, then we start offering the opportunity for professional development as far as conferences. So whether or not there's international conferences or even little small mini conferences, and there's a lot of little conferences that Laravel even puts on that they get a lot of really good simulations that come in and they speak of debriefing. And those are regionally located in different places. So those are opportunities dependent that you could send little small groups to kind of get more professional development. And Axel is an opportunity to be able to get more professional development, ASPE, CSIM, I mean, all of the conferences, this conference itself, right? This is a professional development opportunity. And then once that occurs, there's a lot of the organizations are currently and looking into, there's the National League for Nursing and Axel, SSH have the certification program. So then helping support them, because I think if you bring somebody in and you have this tiered approach, you're not only supporting them and mentoring them, but then you're also rewarding them along the way for the efforts that they've been putting forth. So if you as an institution are giving forth and saying, you know, we see the good work that you've been doing within the simulation setting, we'd like to support you to become a certified healthcare simulation educator. So here are these courses that you can take to start doing this. So that rewards them for those opportunities, because then their credentials increase, right? So it's supporting them from the ground all the way up. And then bringing in places that are really dedicated to debriefing. So CMS does a lot of debriefing. That's where Jenny Rudolph is. MGH has a program that they're bringing in people. Like there's other programs I know that are around the globe that you could bring people in. But again, supporting their education and you supporting it. So I think that's that reward effort to say, we appreciate the efforts and the dedication that you've put into this, because it is a lot. It's time. It can be time consuming. It can be take a lot of energy to do it. But if you're supporting them and encouraging them to continue to do that, you're also modeling that behavior of a simulationist, of showing that you're trying to have that shared mental model with them, and you want them to then in turn exemplify those behaviors towards their students as well.
Muy bien, sí. Los eslabones para todo este proceso de desarrollar una simulación interprofesional es muy importante, y este último eslabón de cómo prepararse como educador de simulación interprofesional, y también en el aspecto del debriefing, sin duda no es dejarlo así de lado. Ya soy educador, ya di 100 debriefing y ya ahora estoy preparado para dar un debriefing interprofesional. No es así. Tenemos que prepararnos para poder coincidir en objetivos precisos y mantener una seguridad psicológica en todas las diferentes profesiones. Esto también es importante, y me gustaría pasar a aspectos como que cada una de ustedes pertenece a una institución educativa, una institución de salud y a una sociedad de simulación. Representan a una sociedad de simulación. Y aquí, ¿cuál sería el papel de sus instituciones? Y hablando específicamente de las sociedades en simulación, ya habló algo Elizabeth sobre esto, pero ¿cuál es el papel de las sociedades en simulación en el desarrollo de programas interprofesionales, no solamente a instituciones educativas, también hospitalarias? ¿Cómo intervienen? ¿Cuál es este papel que ustedes tienen?
¿Me permite?
Want me to go?
¿Me permite? Bien, creo que primero nosotros tenemos que estar organizados. Todas las áreas de simulación, podemos organizarnos en los educativos o nos podemos organizar en sociedades. De alguna forma, nosotros tenemos que estar unidos y organizados para proponer. El trabajo que se puede dar para la educación interprofesional o la simulación interprofesional debe de nacer de las áreas o los centros de simulación, de los formadores y los educadores en simulación. Ellos deben de proponer y esta propuesta no va a decir háganlo, sino tiene que dar cómo hacerlo. Y que seguramente su papel va a ser intervenir y desarrollar programas de educación interprofesional, el fortalecer a todos los que se integren de las diferentes disciplinas para poder capacitar, educar, formar, a partir de los que ya poseen esa experiencia y que ya son educadores en simulación. Por ejemplo, yo no sé si nutrición tenga simulación, seguramente necesitan estar formándolos ahí para que ellos puedan ser integrados. Entonces, las sociedades o los centros de simulación o las instituciones educativas, no se diga la UNAM, que puede proponer, puede ser escuchada. Ahorita se acaba de realizar y que vamos a presentar dentro de poquito, la doctora Laura lo va a presentar el domingo, un libro de educación interprofesional en salud, de la teoría a la práctica, en donde intervenimos varios profesionales de simulación para integrar un capítulo. Nosotros aportamos un capítulo desde la Facultad de Enfermería y otras disciplinas, con el objetivo de dar a conocer cuál es la educación interprofesional, cómo desarrolla, la importancia y hacernos escuchar por el otro elemento, que son las instituciones de salud. Nosotros podemos formar profesionales interprofesionales con las competencias, pero tienen que trabajar en un terreno óptimo que les permita de verdad desempeñarse en ese sentido. Nosotros podemos hacer un buen equipo, pero cuando se inserta en una institución de salud, va a encontrar las barreras que dicen que los otros profesionales no van a aceptar el trabajo, o va a haber esas barreras que rompemos cuando se desarrollan las competencias interprofesionales de comunicación, de roles, los valores éticos que se van integrando dentro de estas competencias, puede ser que no sean compatibles con los que ya están laborando. Por lo tanto, sí se debe de conseguir y buscar que haya condiciones laborales para que se pueda llevar a cabo este tipo de práctica. Si bien las políticas en salud aquí en México hablan, porque así lo dicen, que un equipo interprofesional debe de atender la salud de la población, en la realidad, ¿dónde están esos equipos? ¿Quién lo hace? Las decisiones son unilaterales. Generalmente los médicos son los que poseen las posiciones de poder y toman decisiones, y entonces todo eso se diluye y no llega a la realidad. Entonces, son dos condiciones. Una, formar, desarrollar la educación interprofesional, integrarla en los currículum de las ciencias de la salud, de todas las disciplinas deben de integrarse para poder después, ahora sí, formar equipos interprofesionales. Y por el otro lado, formar un equipo colaborador para que incida a nivel institucional, para que podamos generar espacios de práctica. Por ejemplo, yo hago simulación y ya los formé con las competencias. ¿A dónde los llevo? A prácticas reales. Tengo que buscar un espacio idóneo que les permita desempeñarse sin el efecto contrario que puede ocurrir cuando no existen condiciones y barreras. Nosotros aquí en la Facultad de Enfermería y Obstetricia tenemos el Centro de Enfermería Comunitaria, el Centro Universitario de Enfermería Comunitaria. Este centro es como de primer nivel, es de atención comunitaria, y ahí primero estaba pues atendido por enfermeras. Actualmente ya tiene un programa de servicio social interprofesional. Entonces, ¿qué pasa? Que nosotros podemos proveer ese espacio de práctica, pero lo estamos generando desde una entidad educativa. Okay. Tenemos que buscar la otra, la realidad.
Muy bien. Creo que este punto de vista de institución educativa es muy importante porque establece las bases para integrar esta simulación interprofesional. Me gustaría conocer la experiencia en cuanto a ustedes que representan una sociedad en simulación. ¿Cuál es esta responsabilidad que tienen como sociedad en simulación con respecto a la simulación interprofesional?
So for INACSL, which is the International Nursing Association for Clinical Simulation and Learning, it's a mouthful, sorry. Nursing is in the name. And so I think there has been an unintentional premise, and I got cued earlier today by the person that this question was coming. So because it has nursing, there's been the ideology that means that it doesn't include other professions. And so we've had the opportunity with the current board of directors and our outgoing incoming presidents is that we are trying to be extremely intentional in ensuring that we are getting that word out, not only internationally and globally, but that it's not about just nurses. The name was established because the program itself, our organization was created by nurses. And so that is why nursing is within our name. We do predominantly focus with nursing and helping nurse education and academics in simulation, but within recent years, we also changed the name of our standards. And our standards are now healthcare simulation standards of best practice because we wanted to be intentional of including all healthcare simulationists. And so with that, of course, we do have one of our standards is interprofessional, but in hopes to be drawing more people from other communities and more professions, because simulation isn't it's a modality of teaching, it's a pedagogical aspect, and we have to understand, regardless of our background, how to use that as a tool and a strategy to ensure we're teaching our students appropriately, that they're going to be providing safe patient care. So I think it's really, as our organization, it's the intentionality of knowing that we are putting, and it's part of our strategic plan, is to be having more of an international global reach, but also with that bringing in more of our community as a whole with other disciplines and not just nursing.
Muy bien.
Thank you for that answer. I like that. I think we're very lucky that our organisation didn't get labelled, because it could have been the Association for Anaesthetists for Simulated Practice, because our anaesthetic colleagues really pulled it together in the UK. We're only 14 years old, and it's always been an interprofessional committee, albeit one or two nurses to start with, and then someone who works in theatres, operating department practitioner. And now we're a 20-strong committee, and we're interprofessional, and that's our vision, to continue that, to, because we all talk about the role modelling, and we just felt this really important. And we made an effort, actually, and it's quite sensitive to do, but we made an effort to also be more ethnically diverse, the culture. So not just white, I'm not middle class, you could probably tell, but someone might label me as white middle class British. But so we have different genders, different backgrounds, you know, people from different countries now as well. So it's not ASPE UK, it's a broader society. So that's one of the things I think we can do. But the other thing as a society is we can continue to do what we're all doing, which is getting the evidence base, but sharing that and coming together. And we had a very brief coffee break before we came back for this session, and we were talking about actually what we need is more of this, some coming together and sharing. And we do share as educationalists in simulation much more than others do, but we need to, because the cultural aspects really help. We have an incredible diverse workforce at where I work. We also have a diverse population, but you know, not all areas in the UK do, and so we need to learn how to educate people around that culture. And I was just thinking, I'd made a few notes, and I think some of the things is standardization, having standards of best practice, having accreditation, having CPD, and being able to give people portfolios. And one of the things that we've been working on is actually, it's not to have an ASPE portfolio or an AXL portfolio, Because if you come and work for me and you've got an inaxle portfolio or an SSH, I'm not going to make you go and do it again, because it's hopefully it's an equitable level. So it's something about leveling the playing field, and I think the societies need to lead the way with that. And I think we can provide more for free. That's hard, but that's what we need to do. And I just want to really say how fabulous I thought the universities platform is, and that incredible amount of effort that you have made. And we need to do more of that across the world, because I've learned so much from you just being here today. And that's what I think it's about.
Oh, muchísimas gracias. Quiero, por favor, que se tomen un minuto y medio para que ustedes se despidan con una reflexión. Ya estamos en el cierre de la mesa, y que hagan una reflexión final sobre el futuro de la simulación interprofesional. Les pido de favor minuto y medio, por favor. ¿Quién quiera comenzar?
I'm good. Or do you want to go?
No, go.
Okay, good. I'd made some notes. I was ready for this. So we work together, we train together, we should socialize together, and we just have to continue that. And that should become a mantra. We work together, we train together, socialize together. Important. I think that we should respect everybody's contribution equally, give everybody equal airtime. And that's sometimes quite hard when we're all really passionate, looking at Christina and I and how we are. And I think we need to be authentic. And that's what I'm going to say. Thank you for the opportunity.
Reflection is difficult because I'm a processor. So the question earlier would have been nicer. No, I'm just kidding.
You're okay.
Yeah, I know. There's a vulnerability. And I think that's a big aspect of, and we had this conversation earlier as well, especially when it comes to interprofessional education, not only in our own professions, but knowing that when we're trying to have these debriefings as an interprofessional team, or we're doing a pre-briefing, it's in a simulation setting or it's in a clinical setting, is knowing that when we are admitting to mistakes that have occurred, especially when they have occurred within the clinical setting, I think for me is really always understanding other people's vulnerability, because it's not easy to admit that you've made a mistake. And so I think it's important, even just as clinician, as we go out, is understand really how vulnerable we are as just a human race, and that's something that we all have in common, and to really help to use that for us to be better educators in simulations, because things are difficult, it's hard.
Yeah.
Muchas gracias.
Bien, desde mi experiencia como enfermera intensivista, cuando teníamos un evento crítico, nuestros mejores resultados los teníamos cuando trabajábamos bien en equipo. Cuando yo sabía que teníamos un médico que era muy competente, abierto, y nos escuchaba y proponíamos, y venía el inhaloterapeuta y trabajábamos equipo, nuestro ambiente de trabajo era tan ligero y los resultados en el paciente eran mejores. Creo que el futuro de nosotros, de las disciplinas en ciencias de la salud, es poseer también competencias interprofesionales por el único bien que tenemos, las ciencias de la salud, que es el cuidado de las personas. Entonces, tenemos que desarrollarlas e incluirlas en nuestra formación.
Muy bien. Para cerrar, quisiera decirles que cuando yo tengo un sueño y me lo quedo, se puede quedar en ese sueño. Pero si ese sueño lo comparto e invito a otros a colaborar, puede ser que lo haga realidad. Muchísimas gracias por esta gran mesa. Felicidades. Ok.